And other than that, we're just moving right along with how we usually run. I'll entertain any questions anyone has. Well, with that, I would like to introduce our clinician for JDC, and she's going to present our social work intervention program annual report from last year. Shelley Klingen.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Shelley Klingen. I'm the therapist, social worker at the Juvenile Detention Center. You should have in your packets, I think it's attachment 3.2, is the social work report for last year. We served approximately 53% of youth coming into detention. Total services was 1,316 clinical services were provided. Our recidivism rate for the social work program was about 33%. However, for youth who actually received an assessment, the recidivism rate was about 11%. And the full report is there for you. I would love to answer your questions if you have questions regarding the report.
Are there any questions? Justice Harbison.
Miss, thank you, J.P. Pond. What is the programs with the juvenile court? How can you explain how that overlaps with the juvenile detention center, please, for the newer people?
Sure. The social work intervention program is located within the Juvenile Detention Center, and so the services that we provide are primarily to those who are detained. Occasionally, the judge will ask for services for non-detained youth, but because of the limitations of the program and the resources, we don't open that up for all youth within the justice system. Typically, they are going to be within the detention facility to obtain services.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Justice Yanez.
Sorry, I just got this report, but so what work is done with the families? Is it just the juvenile that we're working with, or the whole family?
We definitely try to include the whole family. That's an important piece of the services. With the assessments, we consult with the families initially, obtain their concerns, as well as gather collateral resources, and then actually interview the youth. Most of our service, if you look at the breakdown, we do a lot of case management. I'm on page, let me see, let me get the one that I have for you guys. We do a lot of case management services, but with the assessment, which we have to work directly with the families, we work to empower the families to meet their own needs, so we don't become where they have to go to get the needs met. We educate them about navigating systems and how the systems work and so forth. So involving the family in every aspect is an important component.
Okay, and so we're working on a jail expansion, right? What patterns have you seen? Because youth sometimes become adults. Well, they do, right? Sometimes.
Hopefully, yes, hopefully.
So, what patterns have you seen that could help us with this jail expansion?
Wow. That's a very complicated question. What we find, if you look at prevalence rates for mental health as well as trauma within juvenile detention, it's disproportionate to the general population, and that's nationwide. That's not just in our county. And so with the clinical services, we're working to provide services early so that they don't end up graduating. And that's why we're trying to measure the recidivism rate. How effective are we? How well are we doing at this? But yes, they do move on up. We need longitudinal studies to determine at what rate that occurs. But that's not been able to happen just yet.
And if you would have magic, what program would you create to help with that?
I'm excited about the center where the police can take the folks for the mental health center, yes, for evaluating what their needs are. If you look in the general population, now I can only speak to juvenile justice, but 20%, 1 in 5 kid in any classroom in America have diagnosable mental illness. Within juvenile justice, it's 70%. And so if you're looking at those kids that are graduating up, you've got to go back to that mental health piece and that trauma piece, the complex trauma. There's about 35 million kids in the U.S. who have trauma issues. So, I mean, everybody has stuff, goes through stuff. What we see in juvenile detention, it's that complex trauma where they have trauma on top of trauma, and it's playing out in their mental health functioning. So addressing that piece, in my opinion, my humble opinion, would be very, very necessary.
Awesome. Thank you for the work you do, by the way.
Thank you.
So I have these youths have access to these programs while they're detained, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, what about when they are released for whatever reason? What is there any follow-up there? Do they still have access to this? What is the story after the fact?
Well, we do partner with juvenile court and the probation officers who end up wearing many hats. I mean, they're responsible for making sure that the court orders are followed, but they also end up working as case managers, and we partner with them in helping the families to continue to navigate the systems afterwards. With the aftercare, with the recommendations that are often made, that serves as kind of an aftercare plan. And then families are still calling us, you know, their youth is no longer detained, but you know, I'm facing this barrier, that barrier, this is what they're telling me with, as far as funding, and we help them navigate those pieces as well. And the same with our adult charged youth, you know, as they move through the system, we give them an aftercare plan that goes with them. It talks about their meds and what services they had while they were there as they move into the adult jail.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed in here he says that 20% of the kids in general population have some kind of mental illness. But here on this one, this says 30%. Here you said 70% a while ago.
Okay.
What's the issues there? What type of mental illnesses are we talking about?
According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that clinicians use for evaluating mental health issues, that can range from transient diagnoses all the way up to significant mental illness. So we're talking about anywhere from adjustment disorders and depression to bipolar, schizophrenia, and so forth. Some things they're going to live with their whole life. Some things, you know, is situational and can be treated.
Do you have any idea how many of these are drug-related?
The comorbidity of substance use is very high. Typically, well, if you look on page 10 in your packet, it kind of gives a breakdown of what we're seeing. But the comorbid, I would say probably 75% have comorbid substance use, because what we see is they're self-medicating their mental health issues. Mm-hmm. And so we're having to, you know, do really good assessments to see if the mental health issues is substance induced or if it's they're self-medicating. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I know bipolar is a really significant problem, and schizophrenia. And I read recently that schizophrenia is largely impacted by long-term marijuana use. You have any idea about that or any?
Well, schizophrenia on its own is just a mental health issue that can stand on its own.
Yep.
It is my understanding, research shows that using marijuana can trigger the genes, the genetic piece, and it go ahead and set up. So there's many things. You can have it genetically without it manifesting, but it manifests sometimes with THC use. But that's not the sole cause of it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the Sheriff's Office Enforcement Activity Report. Mr. Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jay Cantrell with the Washington County Sheriff's Office. Our enforcement activity this month was up a little. Our calls for service up about 300. Animal calls are up. Spring of the year, we seem to always see an uptick in our animal calls. Had a lot of training this past month. calls of significance. One call of significance, we had a drowning out in Beaver Lake out at Point 12. We spent 4 days out there, expended a lot of manpower and a lot of resources, but were able to eventually recover the body and get that case closed. But we did expend a lot of resources out there on that diving event. So anyway, I'll be happy to answer any questions in regards to the Enforcement Division.
Any questions?
Yeah.
How many people do we have in pretrial?
I think Randall's got that number back there. He'll give it to you whenever he comes up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's got that number in the next report. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Randall, you're next with both the detention activity report and the pretrial total bed count.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chair. I'm Randall Denzer from the Sheriff's Office, and you're getting ahead of me. I had that number just for you. Anyway, as you can tell, business is good as usual. We're up a little more this month. As you can see the numbers, everything has increased a little bit. Today we had, high count was 705, had 142 females, had 51 people on the floor. So, like I say, everything's just picking up speed. But the pretrial, though, surprisingly, was down to 355. So that's a little better for a change. Usually after the first of the month, seems like a few more people get out of jail and things have a little more movement, seems like.
Any questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you. When you said 51 people on the floor, that means, are you talking about 51 people that will be sleeping on the floor?
Yes, 51 detainees sleep on the floor every day. The count's been up, we've had 70, 75, it fluctuates, the counts, like I say, pre-trial's down a little bit, so a few more people get beds and so many don't have to sleep on the floor then.
That's very unfortunate, but thank you.
Any other questions? Mrs. Madison?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed in the numbers for those sent to prison from last January to March, it was down a little bit for 2019, but yet if you just look at March, comparing 19 to 18, it seems like it had a little spike. Was that because some slots opened up in state prisons recently?
Yes, they've called us. They, I think it's been about 3 weeks ago that they called for 20 3 weeks in a row. We sent down 60 folks, which is pretty rare.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but that's an expense that nobody pays us for, is housing those prisoners.
Well, that's the ones we get $30, half price.
Oh, okay, excuse me.
But like we talked about last time, the scary part about when we take down 60, they also 60 get out on parole. They're supposedly full. When we take 60 down or 100 down, that many gets out the back door. Just a thought.
Are we likely to see that trend kind of keep on? Are they releasing more people from state prisons, or this was just a March fluke?
I hadn't heard anything about the Emergency Powers Act or anything like that. Just kind of a fluke, really, to call us that many times in 3 weeks.
Okay. Well, we're happy it happened once. Thank you.
Other questions? Harvey, Justice Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you see an increase in violence in the cells where you got people sleeping on the floor?
Yes, anytime we're overcrowded, detention, they're just same way with officers having to deal with them, and there's no space, just like if they put all of us in one room right here, how long can you get along? Mm-hmm. And a lot of them, they're here, and I forgot how many exact number, but at one time, out of the 700, we had about 350 or so that was incompatible that couldn't be with nobody. They'd been there long enough that they'd got in trouble, got in a fight, and we can't deal with this person, get him out of the cell, and then that's what runs our numbers where we have to lock people down. 2, 3, 4-man cells be one person in it because they can't get along with nobody. And we got a duty to protect, to take care of them.
Okay, thank you.
To clarify, when you say sleeping on the floor, it's a 2 mattresses, right, on the ground?
Yes, they'll have 2 mattresses. We've been told that before in federal court. You know, this has happened in other jails, and there's like a boat. It's a plastic, kind of a long plastic piece that we put them in, and then also the 2 mattresses. But we mainly have just 2 mattresses is what they get.
And so are you taking like a 4-man cell and putting 2 more individuals in there on the floor, or how does?
Usually they're sleeping outside in the day areas.
Okay.
On the work release, here we have 274. Explain what that is.
On the work release, you're talking about the work?
Outside.
84?
274, it's down, it says outside workers, community service and work release. Are those people that are allowed to leave jail and go to work and then come back and stay all night?
No, that's the ones we have. The blue stripes you see up and down the road picking up trash, they come in people, different organizations, community, check them out, and they go out and work all day and come back.
So,
But that's that 274 is the total for the whole year. This 84 it shows is what we have, and there's less of these because a lot of these people fall under that 200 we're turning loose every day or every month. So that number's not as big as it usually is.
All right. And community service. So those are the people that are low-grade felonies type people that are allowed, that you allow organizations to use to clean up cemeteries, paint churches, and that kind of thing.
Yes, this is the ones that come in, you know, they're out of jail, they get booked out to come in, they have to come in 1 day a week to serve their sentence, and it can be, the nonviolent misdemeanor felons, and they show up Tuesday through Saturday, and we go do whatever, like you say, whatever needs to be done.
Okay. So they're not really housed at the jail?
No, these aren't. Community service just shows up. That was the best thing about this program. If we didn't, we'd have another 117 in jail.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Just a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is there any way to expand the community service or the work service? Or is there a criterion that you use to determine who can and who cannot?
Yes, I mean, it starts out to see, you know, the violent charges, have they had them in the past, have they showed up, you know, and will they come to work? Because a lot of people you put on here, they'll come, you know, they get to go home and everything. So if they don't come back, you know, then there's a warrant issued and we start the whole process. So you about have to, you know, lift your guidelines, which is kind of scary. I mean, as far as, you know, you don't want a violent person on there or anybody that would cause, you know, anybody any kind of problems.
No, certainly, and I understand that. I just didn't know if any parameters could be widened, but y'all know what's
we have
best.
some gray area that we kind of work a little gray area.
Okay.
Try our best.
I know you do. Y'all are doing a good job. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions? Push the mic. Thank you, sir.
Okay, how about the bed count, the pretrial bed, about the next, as you can see the graph, it's still growing. It's a little bit turned down because I think of our count right now, but it hadn't really changed. It just keeps increasing.
Thank you, Chair. What kind of electronic monitoring systems does the county jail use to release more prisoners? And do you know the numbers in that?
Well, that's the only time that we've used it right now is for like a pregnant female or somebody that's got cancer or something like that. You know, like we talked about in the past, the problem with electronic monitoring is it's pretty expensive to put on, and the cost per day, you know, if they can make that, they usually make bond. Plus, somebody has to monitor that 24/7, and when they do run off and they do break it, then we have to go get them anyway. So it's bigger than just the monitor itself. I mean, it sounds good, you know, the people that, usually medical, you never have no issues, they are home getting well, trying to get to court. That's been our experience in the past.
May I continue for just a moment? I spoke with the sheriff in Springdale, went and visited the jail, toured it, and he seemed pretty positive about his experience using the monitoring systems, because that way the people wouldn't lose their jobs, were able to stay home and take care of their kids, and were on a parameter that was monitored by a system that would alert, not someone having to sit and watch.
But when they do alert you, the alert has to go off. Somebody's got to be notified, because if you don't find out till tomorrow morning, they've got a 10-hour jump on you.
Right.
And you're probably not going to find them. But also up there too, I mean, it works great for them. They're a district court, and they can put these people out. Our 200 that we release every month is really the ones you would put on there. That's part of this 200 I'm talking about. You know, they're all misdemeanor stuff, and that's why it can work so well. It would work good in that situation. But we're already they're sighting out going down the road.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Justice Holmes.
I'm not sure this question should be for you because you may not know. Maybe the prosecuting attorney, it would be a question for him. But of the 350 that we have in pretrial in jail today, how many, do you have any idea what their bail is set at? How many people do we have in there their bail is set at $500 or less?
On the felony, probably not too many. Most of the felons start at $1,500. But the prosecutor, we've, you know, they've been working with us and turning these felons loose, and like I say, they can speak to it better, but they are looking and trying to get them all out, trying to reduce bonds. You know, and we had the 355 and 400. I think you got an email about how that's all broke down when we say 400, which that's another conversation. But we only have about 230. There's only about 230, 40, you know, it fluctuates, actual felony pretrial that you're talking about.
230?
Yeah, I mean, that fluctuates, you know, every minute, but that's the rough number.
Well, you know, I'm just looking at maybe some programs that can be used to address some of these people that are felonies, drug paraphernalia, drug use, that are not dangerous to society, that we could find some programs for and get them out of jail. But, you know, I've been working on this for some time, and it's frustrating. So, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have you heard anything from the state about how soon they're going to have the drug testing facility open in Lowell?
I believe they was talking about, for sure, by the end of June, part of it was going to be opened up.
Okay. Do you have any idea how much that'll reduce the time to get a turnaround on drugs?
No, I mean, there's no doubt it's going to help. I mean, you know, especially just the idea of having to go all the way down there and back, and the time load in this area. I think this area does as much as the rest of the state, so there's no doubt this will be great.
What's the typical time on getting a drug test back now?
Well, I'm not real sure. I mean, you know, somewhere between 6 and 9 months is what I'm hearing.
So that's what a great deal of our prisoner population is based on, is a failure to get drug tests back.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next on the agenda is item 5, which is the jail overcrowding forum. I have been told this is a historic event in this room. Let me give you a little bit of background. In December, Justice Dennis in the old court introduced 3 ordinances, 2 that had to do with passing a sales tax for the jail expansion, and 1 that had to do with sales tax to purchase a radio system. At the December meeting, these ordinances were postponed till the January meeting. At the January meeting, the court referred them to this committee. This committee, through a process of a couple of meetings, has postponed them until action on those ordinances until our May meeting, which is on whatever this Monday is in May. At that time, the people on this committee and ultimately the full court, if it goes to the full court, have a yes or no vote on whether or not we're going to give the public the opportunity to vote to pass the sales tax or not. So this committee's option is either vote a due pass recommendation to the quorum court, vote to table that motion to a time certain, or vote to table that motion indefinitely. That's the choices the people up here have, and I want you to understand that. What we're going to do, we will allow people to speak for 5 minutes tonight. My intent is to give everybody in the room an opportunity to speak if they wish to speak for that period of time. If we have not reached the 60-minute point, or if it's the pleasure of this committee to extend that period, we'll extend that period. Once everybody has spoken, we will give people a second chance if they wish to add something that we haven't heard. I ask that you state your name and address when you speak, and also speak into the microphone so that everybody in the room can hear you the best they can. Thank you. Who's first?
I'd like to make a suggestion, if you please. When the person has finished speaking, ask everyone that's here in the audience who agrees with that speaker to raise their hand. That will eliminate it'll get more people up here, give more people opportunity to speak and sit back down without the applause and all that other sort of thing. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Are we allowed to ask questions?
It's your call.
Thank you.
Have you got this up there? Yes. Okay. Okay, before I start, I need to explain how I'm going to do this because of my time limit. I can only touch on the subjects. I have other people who will come behind me and elaborate and give you more facts because I can't do that in 5 minutes. Originally, I started out with 23 pages, then 18, now it's down to 14, so there's no way I can do that. Okay. I've already furnished you statistics from the Arkansas Crime Information Center and Springdale Police, which prove that around 75% of the crimes in our county are nonviolent, low-level offenders. I hope this and other information I provided will show you that we have so much potential here, so much area where we can help people with drug, alcohol addiction, mental health issues, and help people get on their feet. So now I'd like to briefly mention some of those alternatives and that I think that will help us cure the jail overcrowding. First, it's already been mentioned, but I'd like to mention electronic monitoring because I think that would be a good way for us to go. And the county, right now, if it's $300 a month, that's $10 a day. That's a lot cheaper than paying to house someone in jail. Next, the thing that I have is we need to study on how we can reduce the number of pretrial detainees. And many of those detainees are low risk, meaning that if they were released before trial, they're highly unlikely to commit other crimes. And one way to do that, and others will talk more, is we could have signature bonds with no collateral. In federal court, there's no collateral on signature bonds. So I think that would work here. Next, we study bail reform and implement changes now. When a person remains in jail pending trial or is released, whether a person remains in trial or is released depends on how much money they have in their pocket. Some reforms that have worked in other jurisdictions include check-in with officers, rehabilitative sentencing, and using unsecured bonds as replacements for the money bond system. Next, establish mental health
unit courts. And we've already got one coming up that will open soon. We'll have 16 beds, but that will be filled immediately. So it would be a good idea to start thinking about more of those. I know people are saying, how are we going to pay for this? But when you're thinking that, think of how much cheaper that's going to be than spending $38 million on a new jail. Provide additional funding for the existing drug court and maybe establish another drug court. Study the feasibilities to help study the feasibility of facilities that would help released inmates transition into society so they wouldn't come back into the system. Study whether we should even be housing housing prisoners from other counties. Right now we house federal prisoners and prisoners from Madison County and for other agencies. If our jail is full, I don't see why we do that. I know they produce income, but in my opinion, we'd be better off even financially if we didn't do that. Now the state crime lab, that's already been mentioned, the one in Northwest Arkansas, but that will open. It will be completed at the end of May. Then they have 2 months, they said, that it will take them to get certified. Then after that, they can start taking cases. That should have a major effect too. And I have more statistics on that. At the closing of the Springdale jail, lots have been said about that, but I don't think that is really that big of a deal for our jail. They have 16 beds. They already bring all their felony cases to the Washington County Jail. Last year, that was around 7,500 cases. Approximately 1,500 of those were felonies. All those cases already come to the Washington County Jail. And there's only certain misdemeanors that require an arrest. And I've got that information here too. Study and analyze the 309 prisoner program. This is a trustee program wherein the Department of Corrections supplies low-risk prisoners to county jails. The rate reimbursement for these prisoners is $15 a day. Now, I know they perform labor around the jail, but if the problem is overcrowding and it's not a money issue and not a money problem, then eliminating 309 would certainly have an impact. Study and analyze a high number of felonies. I'm gonna have to get a drink of water. My throat, sorry. Okay, felonies. On April 6th, there were 324 failure to appears and failure to pay fines in the Washington County Jail. And just because someone is charged with a felony doesn't mean that there was physical harm involved in that. Some felonies could include, for example, drug and narcotic charges, theft of property over a certain amount, vandalism, breaking and entering. Next, properly and sufficiently fund and staff the Office of the Public Defender. This is a major, major thing right here. In 2018, the Public Defender in Washington County had 4,525 clients.
Mrs. Koger, 5 minutes is up.
I make a motion that we allow her to finish her. I make a motion that we allow her to finish her presentation.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Who seconded? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
A well-funded and sufficiently staffed public defender's office could make a huge difference in the number of pretrial detainees and would further the cause of equal justice for everyone. The 2019 budget for the Washington County Prosecuting Attorney's Office is $1,358,553. That includes Washington County funding 20 staff positions at a total of $811,183. In contrast, the 2019 budget for the Washington County Public Defender's Office is $535,264. That includes Washington County funding 6 staff positions at a total of $288,592. The prosecutor is funded 39% over the public defender. Yes, the prosecutor handles all the criminal cases, and I have no problem with the amount of their budget, except that I think the public defender's office is woefully underfunded. Establish the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee. And this right here would take care of so many things, and it could be done right now. if we had the, okay, here we go, I lost my place. This committee would include law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, public defenders, defense attorneys, criminal justice reform experts who could regularly sit down at one table at the same time, analyze, solve, manage system issues such as jail overcrowding and criminal justice reform. With everyone sitting at the table at the same time, then with authority to take action, that I think that would be the first thing that we could do. And I don't know why, I mean, that should have already been done. On September 1, 2017, the Arkansas Criminal Detention Facilities Review Committee, when they inspected the jail, in their overview section said, quote, "The review committee encourages Washington County to consider the creation of a local criminal justice coordinating committee, LCJCC, or like mechanism. The state agency that oversees the jail agrees that we need a CJCC, that it's a good idea. Someone will speak after me about ombudsman or a public advocate and how that could also be part of the solution. And 287G, I'm always saying that, but 287G is a bad program. It needs to go. It doesn't contribute much to the overcrowding. I agree. It takes not compared to overall jail population, very few beds. So, number 16, what I've said from the very beginning, we need to hire independent consultants and experts in criminal justice reform and jail overcrowding to come in, analyze and study our existing system and what we could do differently. Let them make recommendations and follow those recommendations. Interview and explore several consultants to find the right fit. Check their backgrounds and references thoroughly. Well, I just don't think that we should go forward with the jail expansion until we have all the facts, information, and knowledge to make an informed decision. In order to do that, we must have an independent feasibility study performed by experts, as I just said. The study that was prepared by Southfield is not an independent study. We can either keep throwing money at the problem as we have done, or we can address the issues. Excuse me. And I certainly understand that Sheriff Helter and the Sheriff's Department cannot fix this on their own. Excuse me, no one can do it alone. They're only one part of the system. But one thing I do know for certain is that if we keep doing things the way we are, then we will always have poor people to lock up and fill the jail, no matter how large we make it. And realistically, if we don't do something now and have this discussion, then it will probably be decades before it comes up again, until the next time when someone says we need to build a bigger jail. The Criminal Justice Facilities Review Committee inspected the jail again on May 5, 2018, and encouraged the county to, quote, "Consider the services of a private or public consultant. A consultant can assist the county in identifying an option that is long-term, economical, efficient, and effective. Has that been done? Not that I've seen. So when we're talking about, when someone says, well, your study that you want is going to take too long, think about if this had been done 11 months ago, if we had started it, then we might have already had a study. Several of you have told me it's the duty of the quorum court to fund the jail. My reply to that is that you are funding the jail already, not just to the extent that some would want you to fund it. It also is the duty of the quorum court to use due diligence, explore, study, and review all possible options before sending this on to the people to vote on, because we the people have no funds, no authority to authorize that study. I think right now in Washington County, we're at a perfect place where we can move forward with new direction and new ideals. We can set an example that the entire state and other jurisdictions would want to follow. We can change people's lives and help people break out of the jail cycle. Another reason why studying our alternatives is so important is that jail overcrowding is an immediate issue. Even if the new jail is approved and the citizens vote for the sales tax to fund it, when you look at the recent bond issues in Benton County and Sebastian County, that did not get voter approval, we should already be working hard at reform. We should be looking at alternatives on what we could do if that happens here. Again, most if not all of the options I've mentioned above could be put into action now with cooperation between the quorum court, the prosecutor's office, the public defender's office, our judicial system, local nonprofits, community leaders, and others. This is a great opportunity that we have. Please do not let it pass by. Thank you.
How many people agree? Thank you. Next speaker. Do you have a question? Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
So I'm sure you did this, but you researched the feasibility study. How long would that take?
Well, the best I could come up with was probably around 10 or 11 months is what I had read online from these people that do that. Now, I called the one in Little Rock that's doing the Pulaski County Jail, but I haven't heard back from them. So, but John Comstock did speak with them, and he can tell you more on that because he's had some communication with them. I've only called and left a message. Okay. Again, if we'd done what they said last year, we could already be there. Okay.
So I'm sure you also researched this probably. What organizations or programs are available now when inmates are released to the public?
I'm glad you asked. There's a great one in Springdale. Let me find that. Okay. I was returning home. I'm just trying to find my notes on it. Is it? Okay, let me start over. 1 and 2. Okay, here it is. I'm sorry. For $30 a day, returning home in Springdale, it helps people get, when they're released from prison, they put a roof over their head, provide mental health and drug addiction treatment on site. They do weekly drug tests, require each resident to attend 12 hours of educational classes each week, teach life skills like balancing a checkbook, help them find jobs, all things that will make these individuals productive, tax-paying citizens, and which in turn will help keep them from going back to jail. It gives them life skills that they need to succeed. I just think something like that, more places like that would really help. I don't know how many people here in Washington County Jail are reoffenders, but I have a feeling there's quite a few.
Justice Harbison.
I think probably 90% of our pretrial people, and I'm focusing on pretrial people, and, you know, I don't know how many services we have out there for people that are just in jail and are not doing prison time. I understand the programs of people coming out of prison and trying to get those people established back into the community. But, and I'm not aware, how many drug rehabilitation or drug organizations, clinics do we have in Washington County?
I don't know the number, but I'm glad you asked that question. One of the things that we do have in Washington County that is wonderful, that works great, is the drug court that we have.
Yes, I know you mentioned the drug court, but you have to have a judge for that, and that's beyond our ability to hire a judge and start a new drug court. That's a wonderful idea, and we need things like that. But what we need are these people that are coming in on drug and drug paraphernalia charges, and I've done the, 301 hearings, and about anywhere, one day that I went, it was about 90%. The next time I went, it was probably down around 50 or 60% of the people involved with drugs that day. So until we address that, we need some local, you know, and I know we've got Ozark guidance, but it takes money. takes a willingness for these people to try to reduce their drug use. And it's an issue, it's a community issue that needs to be addressed. And how many beds do we have at Washington Regional to help with this? How many do we have in Springdale? How many? So I think these are some things that we need to research. If, you know, we have someone come in with a drug issue, then, you know, where do these people need to go other than to jail? You know, yes, we've got 16 beds coming up with our mental health issue, but this is not going to take care of all the people that need help. And I'm on board with you on trying to find help in the community for these people. They need to be bailed out of jail in some way, or I shouldn't say bailed out, they should be released.
I hated, Beth doesn't have the answers to this, but we do have an expert here that Beth still has other things to talk about, but I want to make sure Carla can answer. She can talk a little bit about the drug
well, I'll just
treatment.
wait then.
Sorry.
And she can address that issue. She can address that issue then when she comes to speak. I appreciate that.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, Justice Harbison. But I would like to comment just briefly on that. The committee the criminal justice committee that I suggested with judges and prosecutors and everything, that's where something like that would start. But right now, the judge who handles the drug cases has to spend, not only the drug court, she has 25% of the domestic law cases in Washington County. Well, just think, she could do even more if some of that could be assigned. True, I'm not saying the court can do that, but I'm saying this committee that we've been talking about could take action on that.
All the issues that we're talking about have to do with the judges, the prosecuting attorney, and the public defenders. And these people need to meet with outside people in the community that want to solve problems.
Well,
and so.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Anyway,
well,
thank you.
I don't know that all these involve the judges and the prosecutor. There's several things that, like talking about the inmates that we house for other counties and the 309 prisoners and all the people that are there on a $1,500 bond that they can't make. I mean, I know I've heard someone on this court say, well, they shouldn't have broken law in the first place. And that's easy to say. It's easy to judge, but I dare say that if some of us had been in their shoes and we didn't have the support that we needed at a certain time, then that could be any of us. So I think those are things that we need to look at. Okay, I'm sorry. And I know you asked some other questions, but I don't remember what they were.
Thank you. First, I would like to say, Ms. Koger, that I do thank you and appreciate your diligence in offering alternatives. A lot of times it's easy to disagree and not offer alternatives, so I do commend you for offering us alternatives. So I just want to say that. I do have two questions about two things that you mentioned. You mentioned an electronic monitoring system, and I would just like to know if during your research, if you were able to have an estimate of what the county's cost would be per inmate.
Yes, I do. Hold on, let me find that, please. I'm sorry, were you through?
No, that was the first question.
Oh, okay. When I met with Jay Cantrell at the sheriff's office, and I have met with the sheriff, the prosecutor, the public defender, they've all been very, very helpful. When I met with him, he told me that it's $64 a day to house a prisoner in Washington County Jail. Electronic monitoring costs $300 per month. That's $10 a day, a savings of $54 a day.
Okay, so I heard you mention the $300 per month. So that includes every aspect, including the person that has to oversee the monitoring?
No, that's just the monitors, I understand.
Okay, so that's what I would like to know, what would be the total cost? Because like someone said in an earlier presentation, it's not just about the monitors, but also the manpower to do that. So I would just be interested in knowing what the cost to the county would be per inmate.
Okay, I don't have that, but I'm sure we could get that from the sheriff's office. It would take, or I don't know how don't know if that would mean a new person or what, but I'm sure the sheriff's office could tell us that. I don't have that information, sorry.
Okay. Oh, no problem. And the second question, you mentioned establishing a criminal justice coordinating committee. And in theory, it does make sense that if you have all the stakeholders or all the major tables, all the major players at the same table, that you should be able to come up with some type of relief. But can you give me a practical, real-life example of how this committee would work and how it would work to decrease the overcrowding problem that we have in the jail?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I think one way that committee could work is they could get together and discuss the bail bond system as it is right now. But some of the things that I mentioned, like maybe issuing bonds with no collateral, having a signature bond where someone else would, another person, maybe like a surety, could assign the bond to another person, would also be responsible for helping that person show up in court when they were supposed to. That's really a lot of the problems with the FTAs, I think, are people don't have a way to court. I mean, I've been out to the bond hearings, and they just, it just would help if they had another person being responsible for getting them there. And the committee that I was talking about, there's other things they could address on overcrowding that I think would help, like analyzing the felony cases and how many of those are really violent felony cases and how many of those are, like I said, drug cases. And when that reminds me, when we're talking about drugs, Solomon, could you put that slide up about the big one about how many were drug offenses?
I guess my question is, because I'm just not that familiar with the way that the criminal justice system works. I mean, a committee, in theory, like I said, it's fine to sit and talk about the issues, but I was just looking for a specific way that the committee helps. So an inmate comes in, do you identify certain types of inmates that can't make their bond, and then those issues are referred to the committee? Or is this committee supposed to be just addressing sentencing issues and different things like that? Because in my mind, those are two different things. So I don't really understand how this will decrease the problem that we have right now, because you didn't mention that this is something that can be done immediately. And so I'm thinking this is something that addresses an immediate need. So some of those other things, while it will address those, I just don't understand how immediate.
Well, in other places that I read about how this has worked, is they get together and they analyze cases, and they decide whether each case is analyzed. They decide the risk of that person to reoffend, and they help set bonds, or else they waive bond depending on that. And they talk about they have, well, the ombudsman that we're going to hear about later, he's going to have a lot more information on that, but it would just be a good way to get everyone together and then come up with solutions like that. And that's something they could do immediately. What I meant was about the money bail system. You know, if they would have the power to do that. Okay.
Mrs. Koger, before you finish, would you give us your address, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. 3661 Embry Drive, Fayetteville.
Thank you. Who's next? Give us your name and address, please, and make sure you speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Todd Crane, 2055 South Doral, Fayetteville. A lot of these things are things I've spoken about before, and there's a lot of what was just presented are ideas that have been brought up before, and definitely agree with a lot of that. And as we do this process, I want to make sure of a few things. First is that all the discussions are limited, we limit the politicization and look at the processes, the root causes, and the necessary outcomes. This should be a results-based evaluation. And so that necessarily means you don't just look at the existing processes that have been developed over time, but you look at starting new. So you understand where the problem came from, and if there was no existing system, what would you do to solve it? So you need to look at both methods of solving the problem. And so one of the ideas is set up a dedicated growth fund, and you could take perhaps processing or intake fees, and those are set aside into a dedicated fund for future use in case the jail does need to be expanded at some time in the future. That way you're not increasing taxes to do so. Also set up and implement a cost-based detention fee to cover costs such as charging the city of Fayetteville, who's not currently paying. But you do that in a way that accounts for depreciation and future growth of the population. Obviously, if the city and the area, Washington County's population is growing, if we grow by 50% in the next 10, 15 years, which is projected, then we should expect a 50% increase in incarceration rates, unless some of these other things are done. But so that will necessarily cause a larger jail to be needed. And so you don't just take the actual cost of $64 a day, which is still somewhat unsure of from what my research was, but you add a percentage. So say it's 125% of the actual cost, so that you're setting money aside for future needs. You need to perform a full process evaluation for the courts, look at expedited sentencing, reduce the number of appearances in the court system. That will reduce the number of days that someone sits in the jail. Some of the rules of the entire system will need to be changed, but in alliance with what was just said, to have a task force of citizens included in that task force, because victims need to be represented as well. This isn't just criminal justice reform in terms of making sure people who have a hard time paying to get out have better representation, but victims also need to be represented in the entire process. So sentencing evaluations need to be done where possible using that task force, and the entire process needs to go through a lean type evaluation, and so that involves members of the public, not just so-called industry experts or government experts. Also, the committee or the court should pass a resolution calling the state legislature to evaluate the current funding standards, because that's one of our biggest problems where the largest shortfall comes is from the state funding. So obviously there's no teeth in it, but by the county leading the charge and saying, state, we need you to look at the way this is funded, then maybe you can start getting some change. Also work with local nonprofits to develop and increase the diversion program. Some of these that are currently day programs, maybe they can be expanded to night programs. And so all those work release programs need to be expanded, and some of that involves changing the rules again. And work with surrounding counties to lower the burden or share the burden. So whether that's if a new or expanded jail is needed, maybe Benton County gets the men's jail, Washington County gets the women's jail, or a new jail's built in Madison County. Start sharing and pooling resources. Don't look at everything in a vacuum of just Washington County. Also opening smaller non-jail facilities, but detention centers or transition centers is another thing, like the CSU. Also, one thing that really has bothered me with what I've seen from a couple of members of the quorum court, funding is the biggest issue, crowding and solving crowding. We need to accept all of the grant money that we are eligible for. So having personal vendettas to not accept grant money, I think is misguided and not representative of the people of Washington County. And also you could look at what the benefits and costs of a mental health facility or a hospital, so someplace for the CSU to extend to. After they get out of the CSU, they may need additional care. Would it be more cost effective to spend money on mental health or a mental hospital instead of a larger jail? Further, the percent, and this may have changed, but the percent of female occupants versus female beds has not been full, and I don't know what it is today, but if that's consistently low, perhaps you can set a modular system into the jail to where some of those beds can be switched from female to male to help with the overcrowding. And so those are the primary issues, but the biggest thing I want to add to the previous discussion was to ensure that victims' rights are not lost, or the risk to the public is not increased.
Mr. Green, your time is up. Are there any questions? Thank you, sir. How many people agree with him? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question, but a comment, if I may, regarding the regional cooperation of other counties pulling together, Benton County, Washington County. I pursued that idea and worked it all the way through and had a conversation the first of the month when I was in Washington, D.C. with Congressman Womack. I said, how can we do this? I know that we're looking at a jail expansion, citizens' comments. I shared everything with him. Simply put, unless you have a lot of wealth behind you, like they did to open up the XNA regional airport, this will not get off the ground. That's why you have counties. And he went into detail on how this is not going to work. Benton County's going to do what Benton County needs to do. Washington County's going to do what Washington County's going to do. I argued with him. I said, with all due respect, and we went around the same tree again over and over, and he says, it sounds good in a perfect world, but realistically, this will not work. When it comes to your jails, you will not get a Benton, Washington County regional facility. So I had to finally give it up and say I beat this horse to death, and it's not feasible and it's not practical.
I understand that, but until that conversation's been held with the actual officials and people, then that is still something that should be.
I had that official. This is what I'm saying.
Okay,
I am the official. I was in Washington, D.C. I had a conversation with Congressman Steve Womack for quite a long time. Well, I shared the information that we had from previous jail meetings. But this conversation right here has been going on even the courts before in 2017 and 2018. I even had the discussion with Sheriff Helder. How feasible is this? And that was one of the things that I was going to investigate if I was reelected as a JP. And what I'm saying is, it's not feasible. So sometimes you have to just X off that one off the list and say, that's not practical, that's not going to happen. Don't spend our resources pursuing that when it's not going to happen. Let's do something that has more probability that will happen. Because I know that I don't think the Walton Foundation wants to have their name across the jail. You know, we funded this. They just won't do that. And had a lengthy conversation with him. When he says it's not going to happen, we've done this and this, and he showed me, okay, let's just pursue another avenue. There's a dead end for there. So that's all I want to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey there. So we keep mentioning nonprofits, and it's easy to say, let's open a nonprofit to do this work, right? But that also...
I didn't say open a nonprofit to do work.
So I was going to ask you, you did mention nonprofits. What nonprofits exist that can help with this overcrowding?
So we're raising the minimum wage, right? And one of the largest challenges or groups that are being challenged is nonprofits, because typically they have lower wages for a lot of their staff workers. And so there have been several nonprofits who have come out and said that raising the minimum wage may cause them to go belly up. So some of the staff work and other non-skilled work that the nonprofits have people currently doing that they can't afford to pay the higher rates to, they could use some of the population to staff those positions on a volunteer basis, and that would allow them to take the money they're spending on, say, 5 positions, to now use that to fund the positions that they have to pay more for that they have to have. And so that would be one way that every nonprofit could benefit from it.
It's difficult to keep volunteers in a nonprofit because normally you're doing the work that requires change in the community, which is hard. And so when you are dealing with the complexity of human behavior when it comes to a jail expansion, criminal activity, that requires individuals that are passionate about that work because you were burned out quick. And so that's why I keep saying we keep mentioning nonprofits, but that's a tough road to go to.
And when you're talking about the advocacy work, you're absolutely right. When you're talking about running the office, you're not right. There are plenty of jobs in the office that, but anyway, the purpose of this forum is not to discuss whether or not these issues should be done or not done. Or at least my understanding was to present issues that need to be studied. And so everybody's time is.
Yeah. But my question is, what nonprofits exist in the area that are currently doing this work?
Well, I mean, Seven Hills would be able to do it and benefit from it. Circle of Life would be able to benefit from it. There's, I mean, a plethora of them. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Any nonprofit who currently is paying basically minimum wage for clerical tasks or for, like maintenance type work that you don't necessarily need, that it's not the advocacy piece of their organization. There's hundreds in Washington County, but.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. Justice Pond.
Mr. Crane, I want to recognize the comment you made about being in much agreement with the previous speaker, and I respect that. And the thing that comes to mind that putting two of the situations together, one that she mentioned and one you brought up, and the one that you mentioned in passing was victims' rights. And the previous speaker, I'm going to assume, as I do, that it seems a shame that we have so many nonviolent offenders in the county jail. But these nonviolent offenders, there's many in there, and they're repeat offenders who they've been caught. Maybe they're in jail for theft, and that being said, the reason they're having to steal is because of the drug issue. They've got to pay for those drugs, and they need help getting off of those. We start turning loose some of those nonviolent offenders, which many of them are, and they go back to the same victim many times, and all they're looking for is, so they're not wanting to hurt anybody or anything, but all they're looking for is something to steal that they can take, and for a few dollars, pennies on the dollar of what the item is worth, buy some more drugs. And it's a never-ending cycle, and that's part of the situation. And it's those are not individuals that we can just turn loose and maybe counsel and not have them back out there victimizing somebody that you're concerned about. Mm-hmm. And I'm just saying, I'm taking this in, and they're.
And that's why I'm saying for the task force or what the committee name she used, I don't remember. But to make sure that citizens are involved in that process.
But I'm agreeing with you both that it's very easy for us to sit here and think there's got to be some kind of simple solutions. And I wish this had been done maybe 4 years ago, what we're doing now. But in the meantime, I've also got a kind of a problem with people sleeping on the floor in a crowded common room at the jail. We're getting, while we're doing that, it's a third world country. as far as I'm concerned, and you can't turn them back loose, or the victims that they've already offended, they're going to be victimized again. And so I'd like to have some of y'all stay on board and pay attention to what's going on, but pretty soon the federal government's going to be after us like they are some other folks. And I would like to bring up one other thing. If we don't welcome and help our neighboring counties, I mean, right now, I understand, you know, and it's brought up many times, and we're housing folks from Madison County. Well, Madison County's reimbursing us the full amount, and they're having to do that because the federal government's not going to allow them to house their own people in their own jail. If they have no other choice, because we in Carroll County can't, if we in Carroll County stop helping them, those folks don't just stay over there in Madison County. When they come over here and get in trouble and we pick them up, we don't get any reimbursement from Madison County. Then they belong to us, and it's our expense here in Washington County. You know, it's a free country, and we can free as many of these folks as we think we can afford to, but the victims out here have rights, and I hear from them. And I've said this before, and some of y'all will be, I don't like for this to happen, for somebody to come to me and beg that I go speak with the sheriff because this individual is scaring people in the neighborhood, and it's their own family.
Mm-hmm.
It's I don't think we can wait a year.
Well, you're going to be waiting a year anyway for construction, but the other thing I think I forgot to mention was just, regardless of what happens with the taxes, to implement these ideas as well. So,
Thank you, Mr. Crane, and thank you, Justice Pond. In an attempt to get this done on April the 8th, I'm going to ask all speakers going forward, please try to tell us everything you want to tell us in 5 minutes. And I ask my colleagues, if you got questions, ask a specific question, please. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, John Comstock, spelled Jon, Comstock, 22 Ravenshoe Road, Rogers, Arkansas. And I appreciate it. I was here before. I've been an attorney since '76. I was a Benton County Circuit Court judge for a year and a half, from 11 to 12, due to an appointment. And I had the felony criminal docket, and I've been involved in criminal justice kind of reform issues. I've done a tremendous amount of pro bono work since that time, primarily driven because of things that I saw in the felony court at that time. But folks, with 5 minutes, let me please, don't think I'm being insulting, but let me just be blunt. There is no way in the world that you folks are prepared to vote on a decision to build a $38 million jail. You're asking all these questions about how many beds in a hospital or how many nonprofits. These are the things that if you go hire an expert, it could even be a local consultant, somebody, these citizens shouldn't be expected to do all of that. They're doing their best because they're passionate about justice. That's what's driving them. But what should drive your decision-making are facts, and so you need to hire somebody to go answer all those questions. And let me just give you one example. Talking about a nonprofit, the veterans, we have a veterans court. Guess what? Since I was with you last, I've met with about 10 different people. One was your prosecuting attorney, one was your chief public defender, and I took with me a senior person from the Veterans Administration who's responsible for getting vets in drug treatment. And guess what? He can't hardly get it done in a timely fashion. Both sides apologize for the fact that the Veterans Administration will identify a prospective candidate within a very short period of time, because they get a list from the jail as to who's in jail that's a vet. They identify a candidate that needs drug treatment, wants drug treatment, will go volunteer to be in the program. But guess what? That person sits in jail for 2, 3, 4 months sometimes before the decision-making process kicks in between the prosecuting attorney's office and the public defender's office. That process doesn't have to be that way. Judge Beaumont, I met with Judge Beaumont, and she told me, she said, John, if there is any way to expedite the process, we can get people into drug court quicker. But there's also a time delay in getting that done from the time of initial court appearance to the time of arraignment. I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. I just want you to get a sense that there is a lot that can be done out there through process changes. Your question about the committee and your comment about the committee, this is not about Benton and Washington County. This is about Washington County and all the stakeholders within this county, your cities, your law enforcement, everybody else, your community, getting together and talking through these processes. Because let me assure you, if you go talk to one side, one party, and they tell you what their problem is, why the process works this way, okay, you've learned a bit of data. But what you need is you need them in a room together where people can talk it through, and I'm responsible for one component of that timeline. Maybe I say, hey, listen, I could do this different if you folks over in the prosecutor's office would do this different. And all of a sudden you have a dialogue in a setting. That's what this coordinating committee is all about. The head of the Jail Standards Committee for the state of Arkansas, if you haven't heard from him, you should. Sterling Penix. He's the one that in 2 years in a row has said to the sheriff of Benton County, get a coordinating committee, put it together. In Sebastian County, it worked. It's why they're not building a $12 million expansion to their jail. It's why they've come up with all different alternatives. I could list 15 reasons, 15 other, sorry.
Let the gentleman finish his 5 minutes and we'll ask questions.
Okay, just be assured of this. I could give you 15 like to-dos, very specific things to reduce that population, but I want you to know this, that some of the best ideas haven't even been voiced yet. Because when you get all these stakeholders together who know the process intimately, they're going to identify weak links in this whole process that can be remedied. You're not getting the benefit of that because you don't have this collaborative dialogue going on in a group setting. And in Arkansas, it's worked. So, like I say, Sebastian County, Pulaski County's doing it right now. And the other thing you don't have is you don't have an independent expert that went out and did a population jail needs projection. This company called JFA, and I can't think of what that stands for, I asked him, hey, are you familiar with Washington County? Yes, intimately familiar. They've been doing projections for the state of Arkansas for 15 years, and they're very willing to talk to any of you folks. And I'll give you their contact information if you want to have a conversation with them. I know I'm talking fast, and I apologize for that, but just another example. Somebody said, the drug court, we can't hire a judge. Well, no, you can't hire a judge. Actually, you could possibly hire a judge, but we're not going down there. What you can do is the judges are responsible for the assignment of the caseload among judges, and the judges can be a part of this conversation. And they can decide, hey, let's take this 25% family law caseload off of our drug court judge. She tells me tomorrow, if that were done, she could start admitting new people to her drug court with one caveat. She needs additional funding for a counselor, maybe a staff, an administrative staff person. She does need some help. None of this stuff's going to be free. Okay, 2 minutes? Are you saying I've got 2 minutes?
I'm saying your time is up.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Well, I've been trying for over a year to get this so-called coordinating committee, and no one seems to know who needs to be in charge of this.
Well, you know, it's like a jury foreman. You go back in the jury and back there in the jury, you first of all invite all the stakeholders together, and then you folks have a conversation. You say, let's decide who's going to be our foreman.
Okay, well, Judge Zimmerman is our senior judge, and I talked to her back in June of last year, and I said, I want to bring people together and I want us to sit down and, you know, the judges and the prosecutor and the public defender. She said, okay, we'll do that at the end of July. Then I went and I said, when are we going to have this meeting? Well, we'll do it in August. And then it was, let's wait until after the election. So that's where we are. So, I mean, it's not like that we haven't been trying to do something to coordinate the judges, the prosecutor, and public defenders, and other attorneys that might want to be involved in this. Because each one of these groups have ideas of how they can streamline, but no one's in the same room talking to each other, so therefore it's not getting done.
Okay, so maybe you talk to somebody like Sterling Penix who has helped other groups pull it together, and you say, hey, tell him your experience and say, how do we make this happen in Washington County? Because like, for instance, if I could say one thing about the Springdale Jail, remember last time you were told there were 7,500 people, you know, going through the Springdale Jail? And I think you've since have learned that 1,500 of those were felonies, approximately, and all of those were coming to Washington County anyway. They weren't adding one bed need to Washington County. The 6,000, what happened to those? I met with the mayor. I met with the head of their jail. I met with their city judge. You know what happens to those 6,000 misdemeanors? Over 3,000 of them are cited at the location. They're given a citation, told to come to court. And less than 3,000, or maybe even approximately 3,000, are taken to the booking station to be booked in, which potentially means fingerprinted. Okay, fine. Maybe that's a process that could change, because not all these misdemeanors need to be booked in. And what you as a committee could decide, hey, number one, do you think Springdale Police are going to bring all of their misdemeanors? Do you think they're going to bring them all to the Washington County Jail to be booked in and booked out? No, maybe they're going to come up with a strategy to avoid that unnecessary trip, and you could facilitate that and maybe even charge them a fee for each booking. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One simple question.
Yes, sir.
Who has the authority to change all these processes you referred to?
Well, I assure you this, most of them do not require a change in the law in terms of like state statutes. A lot of these processes are informally adopted by people. It's just the way things are done, and they can change. Like, let's say the electric monitoring, and I apologize, I'm probably digressing just a little bit, but when you guys are talking about electronic monitoring, I get the sense that everybody's always assuming that the defendant's going to pay for it. I just want you to be creative and think to yourself, doesn't have to be that way. You folks could decide to invest in 100 monitors, 200 monitors. You could decide, just like the judge in Springdale told me, I can't remember the number of people that he has on electric monitoring. Now, they do pay for it. But he says, John, we have great results with the folks that are on electronic monitoring.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
We have one more speaker. What's the next one?
Hi, I'll be quick. My name's Loren Sakharov. I teach criminal law at the law school. I'm also on the criminal practice committee for the Arkansas Supreme Court, but I'm speaking in my personal capacity. I urge you to table the motion indefinitely. In addition to what Mr. Comstock said, across the country, courts are finding money bail to be unconstitutional. So I think you all know that money bail serves only to ensure that people who are presumed innocent come back to court for trial. They've been arrested, but they're presumed innocent. Many of the people who are currently in detention, I guess half in detention or pretrial, and 70% are nonviolent. They're in there on bail that has been set by a judge who envisions that if they meet it, they'll be released. That means that the judge believes that they can be released into the community safely if they post their bail. The reason they're in is they can't afford it. The reason courts are holding money bail unconstitutional is because it's interfering with a fundamental constitutional right, which is the right to liberty, and it violates the Equal Protection Clause because the only reason they can't get out is their poverty. The Supreme Court has made clear you cannot put people in jail because they can't afford a fee. So I say that for two reasons. One, if you want to try to follow the prevailing or the trend of law now, you want to think about creative ways and other ways to address this problem, which means releasing many, many more people on bail that they can afford. The other reason I raise it is a court coming to a jurisdiction near us soon may well hold that money bail here is unconstitutional. So if you build a jail, some federal judge is just going to empty it. So and that, maybe you'll like that, maybe you won't, but will certainly mean that building the jail was not necessary. This has happened in Harris County in Texas. Thousands of inmates have been released because money bail is unconstitutional. It's happening in California. Many jurisdictions outside of courts are getting rid of money bail because it's either unconstitutional or because it's so expensive. Philadelphia has just changed district attorneys, and the district attorney stopped seeking money bail in 1/4 of all of the cases. They obviously have a lot more inmates than we do. And a recent study just came out to show that the crime rate did not go up. And I'd urge you to look at that study. It's illuminating because it shows that there is a relatively discrete solution that's close at hand for one particular part of the population, and it's pretrial people who can be released safely, and they can still post bail. It just has to be bail they can afford. How do you get them back to court? Studies have shown that it's actually simple things like reminder phone calls. Now, I know you probably all get reminder texts or emails when you go to the dentist. Well, it's the same thing with court. A lot of the people who don't come either forget or don't have a way to get there. Going to court is like going to the dentist. It's very unpleasant, but you know you have to go. And it has been shown to work in jurisdiction after jurisdiction. We are not the first people to face this. And so I would urge you to take the time to study what other jurisdictions are successfully doing to reduce their jail populations safely. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. How many agree? Okay, our hour is up. What is the pleasure of the committee? Our hour is up. What is the pleasure of the committee? Justice Yanez.
Was the hour up for their each 5 minutes, or was it additional questions we were asking?
No, the hour is up.
The agenda had an hour set for the entire time, and that hour's up. So if this committee wants to go further, it'll have to move to suspend the rules to amend the agenda, because you adopted the agenda unanimously on a motion by J.P. Harbison and a second by J.P. Washington at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, I would have held off on the questions if I knew that was going to count towards their hour.
What is the pleasure of the committee? Justice Washington.
I move that we suspend the rules to allow.
How much time?
That we will allow 30 additional minutes.
30 minutes. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay.
Can I ask how many people are left to speak?
I have a question.
Well,
How many people
wait a
do
minute, we have a motion on the floor. The motion, the question is to suspend the rules and extend the period for 30 minutes. It takes a 2/3 vote to do that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Motion carries. We're going to take a 10-minute recess, and then we'll suspend, we'll resume for 30 minutes.
I wanted you to ask how many more people wanted to speak.
They need to be responsible with their time.
Okay, well,
we're going to go to 8 o'clock.
But how many more people are out
there? How many do you want to hear? Quit asking questions then and just listen to them. That's what I tried to do all night.
Well, you did.
You're the one, you want to make a speech for 5 minutes? Correct. I'm asking if you wanted to suspend the rules and extend the period.
Because
They could prepare. You don't have to put your whole life. And I think 30 minutes is a fair, I think it's fair. And I think we need to use 10 minutes. I think we need to put out with our soliloquies though. And I think there needs to be good questions, not, let me go on. Right. So like so in fairness, they do need to be able to do that, but I still don't want to be here all night either. No, I know, none of us do. But yeah. Because nobody was going, yeah, it was like nobody was.
Just turn it all loose. Stay there. They go steal them. I'm
gonna clean up if I'm kind of like I know and I'm like, the question that I asked, you didn't even understand the question. So what I'm saying is, like, duh, I'm not dumb. If you have everybody just playing a part that gets together, that's a problem. But I was just like, how was that today?
You get this committee together, you get this group together, if it's not going to teeth to bite the law, what good is it?
What good is it? And that's why I'm trying to find some video or like a clip. So
they get a group together and put a letter to the editors,
right. So that, well, I disagree. No, but no, I'm saying you can come up with a solution, but how do you, if you come up with a solution and then it still requires a change in law, or it still requires, and so I was just thinking, like, from an immediate standpoint of view, what is that going to do so that in 3 months we won't hear a report about 400 people sleeping on the floor? Like, well, it's not going to happen. They're going to sleep on the floor and put things on anyway. But I thought, but see, I'm thinking that these are the alternatives so that you have fewer people coming into jail, and that's how you ease the overcrowding. That's what I'm thinking. And maybe I'm not getting that.
I think it's what he was saying was, instead of having these citizens do all the research, let the experts and people who are doing it do the research. And then, no, it's not about I need a drink and I like art living and a cigarette. So what I was going to say is last year's Springdale had 599 they paid 260 community service for every hour they got paid $75. You want to come in and wear our pajamas and drink some wine and have my little grand.
I need to ask you about it. I actually ran for corporation. Okay, that's what.
Okay, we're ready for our next speaker. Ma'am, state your name and address. We've got 30 minutes continuation of the presentations. I ask everybody to be as succinct as possible, and we'll listen to 5 or 6 more speakers. Go ahead, ma'am.
My name is Carla Jones, and I am with TCIY Behavioral Health, and I am at 703 North Thompson Street in Springdale, Arkansas. I am a nonprofit that is willing to help these men and women who have been arrested and are incarcerated in prison at this time. Thank you for allowing me to be here and spend a little bit of time with you. I had a brother that was incarcerated, and I have a son that's incarcerated. With that incarceration, we start to look at what happened and what caused people to dysregulate. If you look at their past history, you'll see that the juvenile statics that were already put up here will tell you why a lot of people are reoffending or why they are offending. Do we need more jails? I don't know. I hope not. I hope that we can facilitate and find ways that we can develop programs that will be able to assist men and women in change and making them to have a place where they can decide that they want to do something different. The choice is theirs. What are they willing to do? What are they willing to fight for? How will we know if we can't assess them? How will we know if they're incarcerated? I am one of those that goes in and will evaluate men and women. So far, I have treated 77 men and women who have been incarcerated. Out of those 77, this was since November of 2018, all of them had some form of mental illness, whether it was depression, anxiety, or drug and alcohol issues. I could not treat the person until they were 72 hours clean, because otherwise I was talking to meth, I was talking to alcohol. In order to find out the story before the story, I had to wait till they were clean and sober at least 72 hours. Then I met the man. I met the son, I met the father, I met the daughter, I met the mother, I met the aunt, I met the uncle, I met the grandchild that some of you may have or may not have. Unless you have been affected by a child being arrested or put into prison, you don't understand how much that puts onto the family that is left outside. Everyone is affected, not just the person that is incarcerated. If we are going to treat the 78% that have drug and alcohol issues, we got to develop programs that will treat that. We have to develop programs that will allow us to psychologically test and see where their assessment is and develop aftercare so we can follow up with them. Maybe that is a monitor we put on them. I don't know. I would hope so. I would hope that we'd be able to put them into the community. I've never met one of these men who were sitting outside my office door and said to me, "Miss Jones, we need to make sure you get to your car okay." I was more afraid of the guy at the car wash watching me try to go to my car. 12% of the clients that I have treated with drug and alcohol issues have told me that they were using with their parents. They began to start having drug and alcohol issues back when they were a child, and they used with their parents. Several of these have had trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder from being victims of sexual abuse, violent criminal behaviors in the home, and some of them being treated for emotional abuse and being raised in foster care. We have a problem. We need to come up with the solution. How do we do that? We come together as providers, we come together and we develop programs. Yes, sometimes I do it for free. Sometimes I go on the street and talk to the people who are incarcerated in their community, and those are the homeless who don't have a place to go. And it's hard, and sometimes it's a lot of work. But if we want change to occur, do we need to build another jail? I understand there are victims out there, and they need to be heard. But we also need to understand that we've got people in the community who are committing crimes because they don't know what else to do. Their basic needs are not being met. They don't have housing. They don't have funds. They don't have the ability to get food. It's out there. It's available to them. But the problem is nobody wants to take a felony. Nobody wants to house them. Nobody wants to treat them. Nobody wants their name on their business. I'll take them. I'll take them. You fund me, and I'll show you how we can build a ranch and build a program that will be successful and that will help them. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker.
No questions, right?
I'm Gladys Tiffany, Director of Omni Center. My address is 105 North Willis Street in Fayetteville. And I have a statement that's not my statement, but I agreed to share with you a statement from some of you may know, Stan Edelman, who has been the ombudsman for Washington County in the past, and some of you who have been here for a while may have been part of the county government from 1999 to 2000 when he was the ombudsman. And that program was very interesting. We told him, can you write us a statement and we'll have somebody share the statement with you. And so he sent 4 pages. So I'm not going to read his whole statement, but he made copies, and I will be giving you those copies so you can study that over as you wish. But there's just a couple of things I want to emphasize that he did say that I think are very important that you're going to want to consider. His program was set up as kind of a pilot kind of program to just see how they could reduce the number of people in the prisons at that time, because that was right before the jail that we have now was being built, and the concern was that they just... Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that. The concern was that like we are now, that there were too many people in the jail, and that and they needed to figure out how to reduce it long enough for them to pull the money together to build our current jail. So it was a similar situation, and this is something that the county government at that time used as a way to try to reduce the jail population. One of the things he says is that it's a very good essay. I think you're going to like this. They learned 2 things from doing this. We can lessen the cost of pretrial detention to taxpayers, especially where detention is not necessary to maintain public safety. And the second thing is that we can mitigate human suffering that results from pretrial incarceration based on indigency alone. And I think those 2 things were things that he was surprised to learn himself. And he speaks as an attorney who'd seen a lot of criminal justice issues, but these lessons that they learned were very important to reducing, and it was the program only went on for the year he was there, and then a little while after that with a student attorney. But they did see a measurable reduction in the rates. So, and some of the ways that they used that, the methods they used were release on recognition. I think that's probably similar to, releasing on their own recognizance. I think that's what that means. And alternatives to posting cash bail, and the ones that he emphasized the most were signature bonds that have already been referenced, and property bonds that were a pledged deed of property that was a pretty common way to do that. And he pointed out that they never had a single defendant default on those property bonds. It never happened. So I think it's an effective way to actually reduce the number of indigent and poor people in the prison. And then the third thing that they did that he felt was significant was that they provided medical and social services. And the world was a different place in 2000 than it is today. And a lot of the services that in 2000 we were taking for granted for people, really, the funding has been pulled back on those. And mental health issues are one of those services that have just been slashed to the bone. And as we figure out how to help people, I think we are also figuring out how to reduce the population in the jails that we are struggling with right now. The jail is not the place for mental health services to be implemented. He really would like to point out that the sheriff's department at that time was really I've forgotten the name of the sheriff at that time, but he was really a motivator for the way that ombudsman program operated, and it was a very beneficial bond. Judge Story is the one who asked him to apply for the job, and he really did benefit by the fact that the judge, the sheriff, and the quorum court worked very closely with him. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your listening.
Next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Dale Heath, and I'm a part of People Power, and my address is 3360 Salem Road, North Salem Road, 72704, Fayetteville. I have just a couple of statistics that are very interesting. They're from a 2016 study by the Bureau of Justice, and they relate directly to money bail. The first one is very concerning, that those defendants that are detained for 2 to 3 days versus less than 24 hours are 40% more likely to commit new crimes before their trials. So that is a very concerning statistic. The other is that in 2014, New Jersey and Washington, D.C. were the first jurisdictions to eliminate money bail. Since then, New Jersey has experienced a consistent 20% drop in defendants held in detention, and D.C. has shown savings of $340 million annually in prison operational costs. So some of these solutions are ethically sound, they're fiscally sound, and they're operationally sound. So that's what I had. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hey. Amber Bruce, Molly Court, Fayetteville, Arkansas. Thank you for all of you for the opportunity to speak and for the service you provide for our community. I'm here as a personal citizen, although it is my work in the social services sector as a social worker that makes me passionate about this issue. As a therapist role, I can echo what others say, that when you ask when is the first time you used, I hear 15, 11, 9, 4 years old. As a researcher, I had the opportunity to find out that those experiencing homelessness who often overcrowd our jails have public utilization services that actually outweigh the cost of permanent supportive housing, even though the list to get into permanent supportive housing is very lengthy and takes a lot of time. And in my current role, I have the honor of working in the cross-sector collaboration with different community members, and I also get to witness the resiliency of people every day when they have time and access to services and equity of opportunity. As a case manager, when someone is released from jail, our clock starts ticking because they're not getting their mail from maybe having a Social Security disability appointment or with the Public Housing Authority or getting their ID. And we are struggling to try to get all those things done before they get picked up for loitering or public intox or nonviolent drug conviction. And so I just felt like I wanted to come here this evening and speak on behalf of those that we try to serve. And also at Salvation Army, we do have 16 beds in our drug and alcohol rehabilitation program. We have a graduation rate of about 52%. And while I don't oversee that program, I would be happy to provide any kind of stats or information. We work with state jails a lot, and we would love to work with Washington County.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker.
Okay, yeah, thank you for giving the public this hour tonight. I know can push your patience, but we really do appreciate it, and appreciate you doing the due diligence before making this big decision. The thing that I wanted to share is that I know cities and counties around the country are facing the same situation that we are facing in Washington County. We're not alone at all. The over-incarceration crisis that we face took generations to create. And recently, it's within local county level and city level justice system that we find leaders who are making reforms, trying new things. And so I want to point out some of what those counties and cities are doing that are modeling what our local leadership could be investing in. I sent an email just before the meeting began, so I know you haven't read it, but there's a link, it's a website link to a project founded by the MacArthur Foundation, and it's called the Justice and Safety Challenge. And they have committed $100 million that they are offering in grant money to communities around the country. Right now, there are 54 counties and cities participating in 32 states. Arkansas is not one of those states. But in each one of these communities, there are local leaders like yourself investing in reforms. So if you go to that website, you can look at the map. You can literally click on every single one of those 54 participating counties and cities and read. It's a really user-friendly website. You can read the unique challenges that jurisdiction was facing and what solutions they came up with that worked locally and what stage they're in the process. Because some of these are pretty recent, and so they're just learning things. Some of them have seen incredible results, and there's a lot of evidence-based practices that we could import here. So some of the examples, almost every single one of those jurisdictions creates the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council or committee. And that's a collection of elected leaders and senior officials who are the stakeholders in the justice system, as well as experts throughout the rest of the community, to look into the details of what is our local unique profile for problems. Solutions that come up can be things like investing in citation and release, and so jail, not even arrest, jail diversion at that point. Some communities are doing away with cash bail entirely. Like the professor mentioned, relying on a risk safety analysis for every person that is pre-trial detained, and not detaining people based on their access to funds, but rather detaining them based on the risk they are to the community. Some of these communities have focused in on case processing improvements, so finding more efficiency and speed in processing people's cases and finding what parts of the system need resourced to make that happen. Some places are hiring more judges, creating new positions, hiring more public defenders to speed things up. Some communities are investing in homelessness services because, or substance use treatment or mental health services so that there are places to divert people. And I know that feels like that's not something I can vote on tonight. But what I think the process looks like is committing to, in my judgment, taking that leadership step of saying right now is a pivotal moment. And so not only do we want to decline to send on to the voters this jail expansion, but rather we want to proactively use our power as the court to convene a new conversation with all these stakeholders, to generate this buy-in, to commit to creating a local criminal justice coordinating council, and then start the process of learning where the weak points are in our system and who can be part of the solution. And finally, I want to say if we frame this issue as an overcrowding issue, we'll think of it in terms of facilities. And we'll look for solutions in terms of facilities. And we'll just reinforce the status quo. Bigger jails, higher taxes, bigger jails, higher taxes. But if instead we look at it as an over-incarceration problem, then we will look at our system for system reforms and look for efficiency and look for fairer ways to provide justice in our system. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Madeline Porta. I live on Shoreline Way in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of this report that was just published by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. It's entitled Too Poor to Pay: How Arkansas's Offender-Funded Justice System Drives Poverty and Mass Incarceration. So I just wanted to read just a tiny part of this, but I would ask that everyone read this report and look through it. There's a ton of really great information in here. So the report says that defendants are routinely sent to jail without any meaningful consideration of their ability to pay. Sometimes hearings last less than 2 minutes, and defendants regularly face incarceration without a lawyer to defend them or a court reporter to record the proceedings. In the absence of basic procedural safeguards, Poor Arkansans who are not able to pay the cost of a traffic ticket or other imposed fine are often charged with new process-related offenses, such as failure to pay, failure to appear, failure to comply, or contempt of court. More charges lead to more fines, and the cycle becomes endless. The recommendations: one recommendation is to end the practices of issuing arrest warrants or incarcerating or suspending the driver's license of individuals for failing to pay fines and fees without affording the person notice that their ability to pay is a critical issue, and providing the opportunity to be heard during a proceeding where the court conducts an individualized ability to pay. And I would just like to stress that the coordinating committee made up of people who are actors in the criminal system would be able to address this, would be able to talk about hearing process for people to determine whether or not they can pay or what they can pay.
Justice Madison.
Is there, could you email a link to that?
Sure.
To us? So there's an email on the county website where you can go to all of us. It's all JPs, I think.
I'll send it out
and that would be
tonight.
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Janet Grage. I live at 2660 West Weddington Drive, apartment 8. I'm a renter. I have a copy of the report if you want to take this and make copies. I don't have a printer at home, so you're welcome to have this and make copies for everybody. I want to report on Sebastian County. They opened their CSU 11 months ago. They had the same incentive that we did to open the CSU. They had the grant money. They got it going. It's been operating 11 months. I'll read you some information on that. They've had 786 admissions, 178 of those from law enforcement in the first 11 months. It took them a few months to get going. Some officers can be trained in the mental health crisis, how to evaluate somebody. The sheriff, Bill Hollerback, says he's going to continue to encourage his deputies and his local law enforcement officers to have the courage to have compassion for people who need mental health treatment rather than incarcerating them. It's a diversion. They don't go to jail. They go to mental health treatment. We heard the statistic from the social worker that works in this juvenile justice department. She said she has 70% of her juveniles have some type of mental illness. I believe our rates are that high in our jail system also. I also want to quote State Representative Justin Boyd. He's a Republican out of District 77. He is one of 5 public officials who pushed for the CSU to open, and he said everything he's heard up to this point has been positive. So if Fort Smith can do it, we're progressive, we can do it. So I would urge you to get that going. Use any power you have to get that open and going. Thank you.
Next speaker.
My name is Blake Chancellor, and I'm a public defender here in Washington County. I talked with Ms. Washington, and I just want to address one thing specifically. There was some talk about this, the committee, and what can we actually do now. There's plenty that we can do now. You know, the jail expansion, certainly I think you need to investigate it, but I want to make clear that even within this system, you can become more efficient. The communication between these parties can affect everything from the way that prisoners are transported, to the time frame that they're taken to court, to the time frame that they can be taken in front of a judge and gotten out of jail. All of those things can be addressed, and I think maybe the word committee is maybe a little too formal. It can simply be a meeting amongst the people, the prosecutor, the public defender, the sheriff, the judges. If those people can sit down and talk, the time frames between courts can be addressed. Right now, currently, if you're arrested and you're unable to bond out, approximately 90 days before you're in, other than your first appearance, but 90 days before your first actual court date in front of the circuit judge. We can shorten that. We can address those issues. Those are things that can be done now. And really all it takes is communication. I have worked with the sheriff's office. They've got an email system that the public defenders now have access to, so we can communicate with our clients quicker, can get more information from them, exchange information. I think that has led to a quicker handling of cases. Discovery, police reports, et cetera, is now becoming an electronic format. How do we get that to the people? How do we get that from the police to the prosecutor to the public defenders efficiently and quickly? These are all things that can be addressed, and believe me, those can all affect those numbers in the jail if everybody were to work together and try to do that. Obviously, there's been some question about getting people together to do that. I understand you can't force them to do that. But I will say this outside, and obviously I'm here today as an individual, but I would suggest to this committee, y'all see requests for budgets all the time. When you give people money without any justification or digging into it, do you really expect them to use that money efficiently? When they're given an unlimited checkbook, I don't know if this jail expansion needs to happen or not. I don't think anybody does at this point. But if you do this without making sure that we are using the most efficient funds, the most efficient use of our funds right now, this won't come up again until there needs to be another expansion. These concerns that you've heard tonight, not all of them address the issue specifically of how to empty out the jail, how to control the numbers, but they all play a part. And if you don't take that in consideration when people are asking you for that money, has it been met or not? But do the due diligence and find it. Because if you don't, again, I'm sure people ask you for money all the time. Do you grant it to everybody? Do you want to make sure they're using it efficiently? Do you want to make sure that they're making the best use of everything they have? Do you want to address the policies and the ideas of why you're doing the things that you're doing? Now is the time to do that. Again, not saying not to do the jail or to do the jail, but now is the time to ask those questions.
Thank you, sir. We have time for one more brief speaker.
Okay, may I supplement a comment I made earlier?
Is there anybody else that wants to speak that has not spoken? If the answer is no, you got 2.5 minutes, sir.
Okay. I just wanted you to know on that pay report that you're going to maybe look at, the circuit court judges of the state and the district judges of the state, with our circuit court judge Joanna Taylor is the chair of a statewide committee that's looking at costs and fees and fines. And I'm told by the administrative office of the courts that they're preparing to roll out some training to district judges and circuit judges yet this year. And guess what it's going to train them? It's going to tell them, let's not, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but let's not incarcerate people for failure to pay fines unless we have first determined that they had an ability to pay and they refused to pay willfully. So we don't just issue a warrant for arrest because somebody has not paid the fine. Maybe we issue what's called a summons, like we do in civil court. You can do that in criminal court. So we can reduce a lot of these failure to pay incarcerations that get picked up on a warrant by just doing a summons and ordering that person to come to court. And lastly, I would tell you that on the all the state prisoners waiting to go to the prison, they don't have to stay in the county jail. I mean, when I was a circuit judge, there were more than one occasion when the prosecutor and the defense attorney came to me and said, "Hey, we want to leave this person out on like an appearance bond." And so that person stays out of jail. And when the sheriff calls them and says, "Hey, we're ready to transport you," then they're ordered to appear at the sheriff's office. And I think you'll find that system is used and routinely is adhered to by the defendants. Sure, there may be an exception, but there's ways to aggressively bring down numbers in the short term. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank everybody for participating tonight.
I would like to hear from my good sheriff and see if he's got anything to say and add to this comment.
No.
Yes.
No.
No?
No.
I hate to ruin a good discussion. It's been enlightening, but thanks, Willie. It was good. National championship game.
Justice Harbison.
Mr. Chancellor made a comment, and since, 6, 8 months, we've been trying to have this meeting. So I'm going to make a motion that our chair call a meeting of the judge, the prosecutor, public defender, and the sheriff in the near future to sit down with the law enforcement committee and work through some of these issues that have been brought up tonight.
Somebody write all that down? Is there a second?
I believe so.
Is there a second?
I don't think we have legal authority to do that.
We don't.
Well, somebody has to have the authority. I guess we could.
Justice Harbison, the elected officials have the authority to get together.
There's the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee that you've heard talked about. It's Arkansas Code 126601 that was created back when they did Act 423, which created the crisis stabilization units. It encourages these Criminal Justice Coordinating Committees. Judge Wood, we've had one in effect that just hasn't officially been enacted. We met twice a month, I want to say, on Fridays, and we had all the players at the table. We were truly focused on the CSU. That, I think, will be on the judges. We'll be asking you to approve the committee. We'll have a formal committee that can now take on, now that this has been brought forward and you're asking for it, we'll take on the jail thing as well. But we have in effect have that. It is coming up. It includes the sheriff, the prosecuting attorney, the public defender's office, the circuit judge's office, local law enforcement. All those people are on it, and so we will be moving forward with that.
Well, okay. I'm going to ask that our chair be part of that.
Your chair is part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Can another JP volunteer to be a part of that committee?
You can invite someone. You can invite.
Okay. I'd like to be able to be a part of that.
Are the meetings?
Go ahead, finish your meeting.
Justice Leming.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.